In today's video, we're going to be taking a look at a RetroRealms double feature review of the upcoming Halloween and Ash vs. the Evil Dead games. As a huge horror movie fan, I'm so excited to tell you how these games represent the franchises they come from, as well as how much fun they are to play. Hello YouTube, it's me. It's Michael B. Thank you so much for checking out today's video, and in today's video, we're taking a look at the upcoming Halloween and Ash vs. the Evil Dead games coming out in the compilation RetroRealms. I want to say a huge thank you to Boss Team Games for sending me out copies of both these games for the purpose of this review. Anyways guys, I can't wait to share with you my experiences with the game, but before we get into that, I want to say thank you so much everybody for checking out the video. Guys, I always appreciate the support. If this is your first time to the channel and you like what you see, go ahead and subscribe, click the bell for notification, all that YouTube jazz. So being a big, lifelong horror movie fan and being a big fan of arcade games, I was very excited for the RetroRealms releases of Halloween and the Evil Dead. But I've got to be honest with you, these games were not what I was expecting, both storyline-wise and gameplay-wise. You see, going into this, I kind of expected that I was going to get a Halloween game, and I was kind of confused on how that would lay out where you were playing as really the antagonist, Michael Myers, and then of course the Ash vs. the Evil Dead seemed to make a little bit more sense, but these aren't actually a Halloween game. It is and it isn't, and it's an Ash vs. the Evil Dead game. It is and it isn't. But the funny thing is, these are actually sister games that happen in those worlds, but with the same overall storyline, and the characters can even overlap. It's kind of confusing, but anyways, before we get into that, let's explain how the whole thing works. So let's start with RetroRealms, and RetroRealms will be the game that you find in your Steam library. It works like an overworld hub, kind of the exact same way Pinball FX does, where you can walk in and there's this area that you can walk around and do different things. Now the overworld is relatively nice. It's got a nice 3D aspect in like a shutdown movie rental store or Blockbuster. You walk in, you're going to very clearly see two arcade games. Off to the side there's another room where there's some videotapes and you can watch videos of the making of and stories of how the developers from Boss Team Games were huge horror movie fans. Then you'll see a boarded up section. Eventually when you play the games, that opens up and that's where you're going to find all kinds of collectibles. The first room has some like story plates or cells for each of the levels that you beat, and then further back we've got some really special unlockable rooms for each of the games. But let's circle back to the arcade games, and these arcade games are where you're actually going to access the two playable games currently available for RetroRealms, Halloween and Ash vs. the Evil Dead. All you have to do is walk up to one of the arcade machines and hit A to enter that realm. Well, let's talk about the games. Now this is going to be an interesting review because I'm actually reviewing two games at once, but at the same time I'm not really, because these are two games that overlap. They're basically sister games that are happening parallel to each other, and we'll get into a lot about that. But anyways, I wanted to start out with, when I saw the initial trailer for this, for some reason I mistakenly thought these are going to be arcade style beat 'em up games. There were a ton going on in the world right now, but I couldn't be further from the truth on that. These are actually action platformers, and the crazy thing is, these are really good action platformers, taking some of the best aspects of action platformers, and you know I love an action platformer, going back to the days of the NES, the 16-bit era of the Sega Genesis and the Super Nintendo, and of course some arcade action platformers, and they really take some amazing elements and make sure they're in this game. So I want to talk about the art style a little bit, and what they went for here was they went back and tried to recreate the era that kind of was around when these games and movies were most popular. Even though Ash vs. the Evil Dead is a more modern franchise, really the Evil Dead franchise and the Halloween franchise really happened around that NES and 16-bit era, arcade era. So what they've done is they've replicated that and they've made it look like really good 16-bit games with beautiful character art, beautiful worlds that you play in, retro modern style games that I think people are really gonna dig. Now, when trying to explain these games, it's a little hard to do. It's a little interesting because these are absolutely two separate games that happen in two separate worlds. Of course, the Halloween happens in the Halloween world, and Ash vs. the Evil Dead happens in the world of Ash vs. the Evil Dead, but they're essentially the same game too. Of course, the levels are different in each, the characters, everything that you see are going to be different, but there's some shared elements because it happens in the same realm somehow. And if you want a big example of that, when you start one of the games, either Halloween or Ash vs. the Evil Dead, you can select all playable characters. So you can select to play as Michael Myers in the Halloween game, or you can select to play as Ash in the Halloween game. And if you go out and you get the DLC characters like Laurie Strode and the girl from Ash vs. the Evil Dead, you can even play as those characters in each game interchangeably. Now, when that happens, certain elements change in the game. Like, for example, there are different power-ups that you'll come across through the game, and elements change to match the character you're playing with, although the levels and enemies are all going to be the same. The big connecting factor is the enemy for both games, which is called the Overlord. And what happens in the start of each game, the Overlord will visit you with Halloween. It's in the Smith Grove Sanitarium, visits Michael in his cell or whatever character you choose. Then in the Ash vs. the Evil Dead game, basically he visits Ash or whatever character in Ash's trailer. While there, he starts off the prologue about how you're going to be chasing him because he takes something from you. With Michael Myers, he takes his Judith Myers tombstone, and with Ash, he of course takes the Necronomicon. Now, one thing that does happen during that process is he explains the dark realm that you can enter into, which is going to be a big part of the gameplay we explain in just a minute. So he actually drops an eyeball that all the characters will pick up that will enable them to basically switch from the overworld they're in, the normal world, to what's considered to be like a nightmare realm, dark realm with the eyeball that changes the dynamics, helps with platforming, and the enemies are a lot harder. Very similar to what happens in A Nightmare on Elm Street on the NES, where you switch from the regular daytime mode to where you're asleep in the nightmare, and the levels and enemies change a little bit. So that's another feature I really like that they do here. So while the game's storyline doesn't necessarily replicate what happened in the original Halloween movie or in the popular Stars series, that doesn't mean fans of both franchises won't be happy with these games, because they include so many elements that you are in fact playing in that world. For example, in Halloween, you start out in Smith Grove Sanitarium. You're going to progress through there, move on to Phelps Garage, where everybody knows Michael collected his famous overalls that he's worn every movie since, and then from there you're going to go to the Haddonfield suburbs. And then with Ash vs. the Evil Dead, it's the same thing again. You start out in the trailer park where Ash lives, then moving on from there you go to the famous woods from the original Evil Dead movie. You're going to go to a haunted cabin, and then from there you're going to go to Ash's birthplace, the town where he grew up, which, if you're familiar with the TV series, you know Ash did as well when he went to meet his dad. And it doesn't stop just with the location, because in each of these levels you are going to come across characters, enemies, and different things that resonate with that area. For example, all the enemies fit in that world, all the bosses fit in that world, and are iconic people from each franchise. The only thing that's tied in and kind of out of place is there are some elements from the Overlord. You're going to see some floating eyeballs and some other nightmare creatures that don't really fit the actual storylines, but they do make sense in the terms of the game. Now let's talk a little bit about the gameplay, and the games, like I mentioned earlier, are arcade-style action platformers that really take a lot of elements from some of the greats in the genre. So it's pretty simple to play. You attack with your main weapon by pressing X, you jump with Y like any basic game, but you also have a charged attack that will see Michael do a shadow lunge strike, and with Ash, what's even cooler, your charged attack is Ash breaking out his boomstick. There are also special attacks that can be unlocked, combos, and one of my favorite elements is a jumping attack where you press down and X, which will enable a pogo-like effect very similar to what we noted from DuckTales on the NES. Now, there are also sub-weapons that you can collect, much like in Castlevania, and instead of hearts, you're going to be picking up ammo that will increase the number of, or refill the number of, sub-weapons you do have to use at your disposal. Now, the sub-weapons are detailed to the character you're playing as. That means Michael has different sub-weapons than Ash, who has different sub-weapons than Laurie Strode, who has different sub-weapons than the girl from Ash vs. the Evil Dead. You're also going to be collecting different items that are going to refill your health, refill your ammo, which we just talked about, and also refill your Dark Realm meter, which we're going to get into in a little bit. You're also going to notice that these collectible items, much like the sub-weapons, will also change depending on which character you're using, regardless of the game. Now, one interesting aspect as you're playing through the game is you're going to be collecting currency. Now, in a lot of other action platformers, the currency is merely there as points. Think of, Ghosts and Goblins. You get like a giant king symbol. It's a pile of points. Here, the currency actually matters because you're going to be collecting currency throughout the level, and then between each stage, you can actually use that currency to purchase upgrades. These upgrades will allow you to increase the amount of health you have, increase your Dark Realm meter, increase the amount of ammo you can carry for your sub-weapons, also unlock special moves, a lot of really cool stuff, and a reason to play the game over and over. So there's something for replayability. So let's talk a little bit about the platforming, and the platforming here is actually really solid. It's not one of those games where you're just going left to right. There's a lot of cool things happening. You get a lot of special abilities, kind of like a wall jump. Think of Batman on the NES, where you're going to go back and forth to traverse. And then one of the other really cool elements I mentioned earlier, you're going to go into the Dark Realm with the eyeball from the Overlord. Now, this becomes absolutely essential for moving across the game. Again, like Nightmare on Elm Street, there's certain times where it's going to make it impossible for you to do things in the normal realm. You're going to have to switch over to the Dark Realm because it opens up certain passages and platforms that you're going to need to progress. The other thing that's very important about the Nightmare Realm is there are in fact collectibles you're going to get during the stage. For Michael Myers, you're going to collect 3 Halloween pumpkins like on the logo, that traditional Halloween pumpkin. Once you collect them in the stage, at the end you're going to get a huge boost to your currency, which is essential for powering up. And then with Ash, it's the same thing again. You're going to be collecting 3 Necronomicons. Now, the big thing about this is some of these are hidden, and what seems to be behind impossible barriers, that's where the Dark Realm comes in. It's going to open up passages so you can actually access these. Now, keep in mind, when you're in the Dark Realm, you have to be extremely careful because the enemies get a lot more difficult. They move from the characters we're familiar with from each of the franchises to these nightmare characters that, answer to the Overlord. They're a little bit tougher, exactly like Nightmare on Elm Street. Again, when you go into the nightmare, the enemies are tougher, and on top of that, you have a meter for how long you can stay in the Dark Realm. So if you're in the Dark Realm and you're in one of these openings that are only there in the Dark Realm and your power runs out, it will basically start the game again, switch you back over to the normal realm, and if you're in a wall, it'll actually hit you and take away some of your health. You'll notice this as the actual screen rewinds like a VHS tape, and you're put back together on screen to go back to playing. Same things happens when you fall in a hole. It's not an instant death, which, believe me, I'm so glad we don't have those Castlevania knockback instant deaths here. Instead, you just lose 1 heart piece and they'll rewind and put you back on the last point you were on. Now, each level or location you visit has 2 stages. In the first stage, you're just going to traverse left to right, do your collecting, and then at the end, you're going to hit a marker point which resembles the world that you're in. So, for example, in the Halloween world, usually the endpoint is marked by a Judith Myers tombstone. It's different depending on the characters, but in the Ash vs. the Evil Dead game, you're going to come up to Ash's iconic car, then you're going to run down some deadites. When you play as Michael Myers in this situation, you still get in a car and just run down the deadites anyways. Don't forget, somehow Michael learned to drive at the Smith Grove Sanitarium. At the end of the second stage, you're going to get into your classic boss fight. Now, these bosses are representative of characters from each of the franchises. In the first level, in Ash vs. Evil Dead, you meet like the cleaning lady for the trailer park, but it's not just her as a deadite because she actually gets powered up by the Overlord. And then with Michael Myers, you come across another inmate that the Overlord powers up that Michael has to take down. These boss fights are great, truly do meet the standards of those great NES and 16-bit era boss fights. Each of the bosses have different attacks, there's patterns to learn, and the secret to getting past them is learning the pattern, perfecting your movements, and they're challenging and fun and will keep you coming back for more. The other cool thing is, once you die in a boss fight, you go back to the beginning of that subsection and then you get to play again. And there's unlimited continues. And you know what that means? Any game with unlimited continues is absolutely beatable. So anyways, guys, that's my look at RetroRealms, the Halloween and Ash vs. the Evil Dead retro modern 16-bit inspired arcade style action platforming games. Personally, I was a little concerned going in because I didn't know how they were going to work out a storyline that wouldn't upset, hardcore fans of either franchise, especially Halloween, where you play as Michael Myers. How do you work that out, and how do you do a storyline? But with the inclusion of the Overlord and the way the worlds intermingle, the more I played of it, the more I liked the concept. And what really helps is the fact that these are just really great action platformers that are actually faithful to the material, at least in a way that's not going to upset the hardcore fan bases. Anyways, guys, let me know in the comments down below, what do you think of RetroRealms, the 16-bit inspired action platforming games from the original 1978-79 Halloween movie, and of course the popular stereo series Ash vs. the Evil Dead. Are you excited to pick them up? Try them out for yourself. Do you think they'll be perfect for Halloween? Let me know. Once again, thank you so much for watching, everybody. This is Michael B. the Game Genie. I'll talk to you next time.